Slow your retreat, but as sure as the dawning, leaving but memories and strive as you may, looms the bliss of eternity yawning, and into its maw and forever away. Chapter 8. Working on the Quien Sabe. In the year 1901, I wandered back to Portales, New Mexico, looking for land of my own. I went there to Fort Sumner, and from there to Tucumcari, where I brought up the improvements rights of a man named Teague. He had had a fair little house, a dugout, and something near 20 acres of good land and farm, which I had planted corn and cane. I worked in the cedar breaks, cutting posts, hauling them into Portales for sale. Many of the settlers had rather buy them already cut. I stayed in the new home until 1901. Then I went back to visit the folks. Dad needed help, so I sold my place to a friend at Portales, and winter was a severe one. Dad and I fed a bunch of beef cattle, which were sold later at a fairly decent price. The spring of 1903 came. With this a slow, quiet turn of the season. I sat down in the milk buckets one day. With a heart tinged with frustration and unrest, I put all my belongings in a wagon and headed for Gaines County, Texas, as yet unsettled. I went to the ranch of Henry Half in the northwest corner of the county. Mr. Half had several thousand acres of land in Midland, Glasshock, and Upton. He didn't have work for me just then, so I went to New Mexico and hired out to Ben Baker, better known as a sea hop on account of his makeup. He was a bachelor of 50, 6 feet 9, and weighed 165 pounds. His legs made up most of his form, and they were about 4 feet long, more or less. But old Hop was a cowboy. He was one of the best ropers that the world had ever known. He was a man of few words and very droll. He had sandy complexion, a Roman nose, hatched face, but for some reason was very well liked by the ladies. I was foreman of the Crazy J outfit, and he seemed to want to give me plenty of horses to ride. They had a surplus of young half-broken ones ranging from 5 to 7 years old. Only a few had ever been ridden with bridle. Most of them had only been haltered and broken 1 or 2 years prior to being turned out on the range. One of the horses I rode was an old iron-gray horse that would have been the pride of any cowboy had he been gentle. But as he was shunned by all who knew him. Old Hop had never had a puncher to ride him. He had thrown one man, Blondie Tom Arnold, in the sandy hills and had worn the saddle until he sank up so badly that the sand he was lost. Only few pieces were ever found. Mr. Arnold, who weighed about 185 pounds, was a real bronc-buster, too. When Sea-Hop turned out the long, slick black, he told all the boys to take down their lassos and be ready to catch the Nestor's horse. But I sat loose in the saddle and fanned the beautiful black with my top hat. Before I quit, I had the horse under control. Instead of Hop being pleased, he seemed to be irritated at me. So when 8 different cow wagons camped in the circle several days later, Bob Puckett roped out a horse called Blue Jay and brought him out to Gene Higgins, a New Mexico wild horse tamer. He held him down while I buckled the saddle. When it was ready, he told Bob to slacken the rope, and I sprang into the saddle and told Higgins to let her go. He turned the brute loose. First I went up into the air. Then a big silver watch flew up above me, which was picked up by some of the men. Blue Bronco did his best at the fence rows for a few minutes, then changed his tactics by swinging his sides for a while of a lightning speed. Then he would crawfish. I conquered the horse. When I rode him back to the wagons, I got many compliments and handshakes. Some ladies came up to praise me. I tipped my hat and moved on by them. After branding was over that summer, I visited home again. In Baylor County, Texas, I broke a 5-year-old stallion. This took place on the ranch of Mr. Elmer Scholes. It took 2 good men and myself to saddle the horse. He tried to paw me to death before I could ride him. He kicked and bit at me with all his strength. When I mounted him, he quit the earth and bucked with all his might. It took me only 4 days to master him for Mr. Scholes. He paid me, and I moved on. Dad soon met me at Stanton, Texas, and we purchased some land from the state of Texas. I purchased 4 sections in one of Henry Half's pastures. I paid $1.50 per acre of it. I started out improving immediately. When I ran short of money, I went back to Mr. Half and asked for work. His foreman, Ace Robinson, had just quit to marry a girl in Fisher County, and Bob Thomas had taken his place. Bob was a seasoned cowboy, liked by all. He liked his red whiskey too well, though. In 1905, he nearly lost his life from it. He got stewed and lay out in the snow overnight and froze his face and ears. I found Barnes Tillis at the headquarters ranch. He was a tall, dark man, black hair and eyes, and very nice looking. He was the foreman. He was a bit rough on me at first, and I told him my business, and he tried to hurrah me about making a living on 4 sections. I informed him I wasn't afraid of starving. I started for my horse, and he called me back. He told me not to get so impatient. Good men were needed at the Quien Sabe. We went into the house where he wrote a letter for me. Before I left, I had leased Mr. Barnes my 4 sections of grazing purposes, also my dad's land. Dad had returned to Wilbarger and did not intend to return until spring, when he would build a house. The law required him to live on 1 section of the land for at least 6 months out of the year for 3 years. Mr. Thomas seemed pleased to have me working for him. He made things pleasant as possible, and winter passed and spring came. The horses and cattle had come through the cold in good flesh. But once, while cutting cattle to be shipped from the ranch to Kansas pastures to fatten up for all the markets, I was almost killed by one of my favorite cutting horses. We were driving some 6,000 head to Portales, where we would ship them on. My horse fell on me and smashed me flatter than a pancake. I stayed unconscious for about a week. The rest of the spring of 1905 passed without mishap. In early fall, I overmatched myself in a fist fight and got an eye closed and my nose broken. My opponent weighed about 250 pounds. Next to me, he looked like a giant. I decided I had business somewhere else and headed in another direction to attend to it, but my enemy was giving me a fast chase. This was the only time I backed down from a fight. I headed for the house and out of sight. Soon after that, Bob was sent to Mineral Wells for treatment of rheumatism, and he never returned. Later, he became a foreman of another ranch in Baylor County. I was made foreman of the J.M. Ranch. It was while working on the house spread that I was waylaid by 2 brothers and nearly killed. I was busy moving fence. A man by the name of August Holbrook was helping me. Bert Ansel and his brother Lee wanted the fence for their own use and tried to take it from us. Bert hit me in the head with an axe. Then, as he started at me again, Lee yelled at him for him to leave me alone, as I was already dead. August carried me to town with blood spurting everywhere. I wear a steel plate to this day resulting from that brutal attack. I'll relate one more story about Bob Thomas before I leave him for good. While he was still at the ranch, we were told to get 4,000 head of cattle that were watching all together in one pasture, so they would be thrown into 2 herds by trail outfits who were coming to take them to Portales. This was during the month of May. The weather was rainy and cold for that time of year. The cow chips were so wet that they could not burn. There was not a stick of wood to be found in the J.M. or Portales. There was a mad cook and a hungry bunch of cowboys that arrived in town several days later, who had not had a good night's sleep in days and only half-cooked chow. The boys tried to keep warm by pouring down their corn juice. The town was quite changed. I hardly recognized the little town where I had helped bury Pegleg Logan. I was too tired and hungry myself to care much about that. The railroad had been built through the country from Amarillo to Portales and on to Roswell, from Roswell down to the Pecos River and to Pecos City, where it made connections to the Texas Central Railroad. The building of the railroad had brought the people in from all over the country. As best I remember, there were maybe 9 bars and gambling houses that never closed their doors. There were other cow outfits shipping as many cowboys spent their money at these bars. Poor old Bob was one of them. He spent his last red cent in that town. When we got ready to start for the ranch, he had nothing left to show for winter work. He scarcely had clothes to keep him warm. He was a big, sympathetic fellow, Bob was, and he never did anyone any harm except himself. He hated red-eye of any brand, so that when he found it, he just wanted to get it out of the way of others. Leastwise, that's what he would say. Rufus Bishop was a good friend of his. He wanted to help Bob all he could, but to keep Bob from getting too drunk, Rufus called in everyone else to help get rid of the stuff for Bob. It was indeed a hard-looking bunch of men that started back to Midland. We took a good supply of whiskey with us. When one of the men got too drunk to ride, we unsaddled his horse and staked it near him, and left him to come on when he'd sobered up. Henry and Clark, Bob, and Lee Reynolds were 3 days catching up on us. The terrible part was Clark was killed by one of the best horses on the ranch trying to catch up. Some of the boys lost their jobs when we got back to the Half Ranch. When Mr. Half sold me the J.M. Ranch, I was forced to go to Midland if I continued to work for him. I really liked my job and my boss. When he sent the wagon and the men to the JM to get the cattle moved from there to the Pecos River Ranch, I took my saddle horses and went to the headquarters in Midland. Mr. Half gave me a job on his ranch in Glasscock County. Mrs. Rosa Half was a native of New York City, but she seemed to love the country around her. She had three brothers, Dan, Bill, and Lawrence, who were jolly young fellows and were willing to take all the jokes and knocks and the good humor up to a point. They asked many questions about the ranch life when they visited her. They had been on our ranch one day when I arrived. After they rested a few days, Mr. Half asked me to get one of the boys who was working there to take the wagon and team to go to Lawrence, to Midland, after their trunks. I asked Claude to go. Mr. Half told Lawrence to go to the barn so he could get ready for where Caudle was. Lawrence went to the barn, and Caudle decided to have some fun with him. He handed him a bridle and showed him old Jonah, and told him to walk upon the right side of him very carefully. That the mule was blind in his right eye and he could not see him. He told Lawrence to just grab the beast around the neck with both arms and hold him, or he would get loose. Then he would be hard to catch again. Lawrence obeyed. Jonah paid and whirled around like a top, then he slung poor Lawrence loose. After a while, the mule kicked off most of the kid's clothes and ran away, leaving the boy bare and bruised and bleeding. It was in that condition he limped back to the house. Mr. Half had heard the commotion as the cowboys had gathered around and were laughing their heads off at Lawrence and his mule. When Mr. Half saw Lawrence, he was so furious at all of us, and he asked him how he had gotten so torn up. "I guess I've done something mighty funny from the way those cowboys are laughing at me. That mule nearly killed me, and I don't see a thing funny about that." Lawrence went into the house in a huff. Mr. Half came to the barn and asked me what happened. I had to tell him. I was in the barn, and suddenly I saw Lawrence in the air, feet and all hanging with both arms around old Jonah's neck, and old Jonah acting like a bronc mule that had been turned loose on with a harness on. I went to Caudle, who by that time was trying to harness Eve, Jonah's mate. He told Mr. Half what had happened and laughed again. He got fired. Mr. Half was an easy man to work for. He had reasons for everything he did. He was kind to all his men, but the pranks were not always funny to him. I sent Zach Monroe then with instructions to take good care of the boy. I handled Caudle's check and told him he could take him as far as Midland. He hated to lose the job, but said it was worth it to see such a show from the tenderfoot. Things went along smoothly until the two boys decided to learn to ride a horse. They wanted to be cowboys, they thought. Mr. Half asked me if I had a gentle horse or two that they could mount for the boys to use a little while. I told him I had one I would recommend as safe. He said, "Give it to the youngest, and the next to Lawrence." I remember only Lawrence and Dan being at the ranch. I really dreaded this ordeal, but the boys were so eager to try out their mounts. Dan was 19 and was a bright pup and favorite of the men. Lawrence was large and gawky and slow to catch on, and a bit independent. He wore glasses, so we called him Frog Eyes. I caught and saddled up Old Heart for the kid, and I saddled Old Dutch for Frog Eyes. The boys came on the scene dressed in their cowboy uniforms, broad-rim hats, boots, spurs, and the works. They led their horses out of the corral, and I held the youngest boy's horse for him while he mounted. The eager beaver Frog Eyes couldn't wait. He just had to do it himself. As soon as Old Dutch felt the weight in the saddle, he began to move out. He was a spirited beast and accustomed to being handled by experienced cowboys. Frog Eyes left his bridle reins hanging loose, so when he landed behind the saddle and struck Old Dutch in the flanks with his sharp spurs, the old horse started in a gallop. I yelled out to him to get in the saddle and pull up the bridle reins. The warnings came too late, or he just didn't hear me. Old Dutch lost no time then unpacking his inexperienced rider. I put his nose to the ground and sent his tail and heels into the air as high as he could. The kid landed on hard, solid ground in front of the shop door. He landed all spread out on the front side from turning a few somersaults in the air like a circus clown. I ran to him and tried to help him get up. He weighed about 50 pounds more than I did, and nearly pulled me down in the effort. In the background, the cowboys were fairly whooping it up. Mrs. Half came running from the house. She helped the boy get dusted off and grabbed his stomach and gasped, "Oh, my stomach! Oh, my stomach!" He was a trooper. Later, he wanted to ride another horse. I caught Glasseye for him. I told him the horse would do fine if he treats him right. He was a little more patient this time. He waited for me to hold the horse while he mounted. The horse stood perfectly still until Lawrence gabbed him with his spurs and pulled as hard as he could on the reins. The horse started and reared up and fell broadside on the ground. He caught Frog Eyes beneath him and mashed his leg and foot pretty bad. He was out of commission for several days. By the time he was up and around, he had lost all desire to live the life of a cowboy. Dan was different. He liked to ride and watch the cattle graze. He told us all about his girl in New York and promised to bring her to visit with us. He did bring her to the ranch, but after I was gone. About this time I met Belle DeLoche, and we passed many happy hours together. She dearly loved to dance, though, and never missed a cowboy entertainment given a Saturday night. I liked to sing, but seldom tried to dance. I played the fiddle for some dances. We had a short engagement, though. On the 4th of July, I carried her to the dance in Knowles, New Mexico, that budding little town I mentioned in connection with meeting Hill Loftus, Ellis Tom Ross, Ellis Charles Gannon. At 2 in the morning, I asked Belle if she hadn't danced enough for us to leave. She informed me that she would dance as long as she pleased, and it pleased her to stay. I had promised her parents I would see her home safely, and no later than 2. I couldn't get her to budge. I informed her brother then of my plans and told him I was going to go home to bed, and asked him to see that she got home. That was all of that romance. I left early the next morning and headed for the ranch headquarters, leaving her behind me forever. In about 10 days, I got a letter of apology. Many years after that, I saw an uncle of hers who told me she was still single. In November of 1907, I had to go to a pasture that was called the Three-Well Pasture. I'd be gone several days, and when I returned, I found a young lady visiting Mrs. Will Medland and her husband. The Medlands had moved to the ranch after Miss Half and his family had left for the winter. It was their custom to spend the winter months elsewhere, probably in Atlanta City, Georgia, and the White Mountains where he first met Miss Half. Mrs. Medland did the cooking, and Will did the milking and other jobs. Their own little ranch was close by the house spread. After Mrs. Half departed, there were no men on the ranch except for Mrs. Hound. She was visited by women from neighboring ranches or friends from Midland or Garden City. But, as I remember, this young lady was the prettiest of them all. Myrtle Ashley was her name. Mrs. Medland finally introduced me to her one day at dinner. But Zach Monroe and Ben Steen claimed her all the time. I had very little time to talk to her. I chided myself anyway for thinking she might go for the likes of me. I had been a loner all my life, and I thought I'd best keep it that way. However, the day before she was to leave, and I realized I might never see her again, I did panic a bit. Mrs. Medland asked me to hitch my team to the buggy and to get Miss Molly Hilder to bring her to the ranch that evening. She wanted Molly to spend the night there and help Myrtle entertain the hungry cowboys. We were all starved from the sight of some pretty girls. I had no objections to Miss Hilder coming, but wanted some of the other boys to go get her. We stayed up late that night. I did some singing for them and got a few chances to talk to Myrtle. After I went to bed that night, I reflected upon the prospects of the future and regretted much of my past. I wondered then what hopes I had, or did I dare imagine Myrtle as my wife on a little ranch, maybe children. I thought of some of the experiences I had after the Stewart Ranch before I finally made it back home. I'd gone to work for the Diamond A Ranch in Arizona. While hunting the Yaqui Gold, I nearly lost my life. I thought, too, of the fight I'd had in Bisbee. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a put-up job. A gambler needled me in the bar for drinking soda instead of whiskey. I took all I could, and I jumped him. He outweighed me 40 pounds or more. My toe caught the gambler in the crotch, and my right fist landed on his chin. My left was a burr at his ear. I kicked in some ribs, broke his jaw, and did damage to some front teeth. Some of the men from the ranch had tried to pull me off, but I just kept on kicking and slinging. The foreman said I was the finest piece of humanity he had ever seen. I told him that I was the maddest I had ever been. While I was fighting, someone took my 2 fine horses. I left the Diamond A early the next morning to go after the thieves. 3 days later, I came back to the ranch, riding one of my horses, leading the other one, and the borrowed one. I showed the men 4 pair of human ears I had taken from the horse thieves. One man came by the ranch one night and talked us into going down to Old Mexico to hunt gold. I had been across the border and didn't want to go again, but the men were dead set on going. I thought of the canyon we got trapped in. 10 men had quit the ranch to take the trip, and 2 of us had only returned. The Indians had also took my 2 fine horses, so that night I lay and I thought of the foolish things I'd done. I felt unworthy of her love. Before Myrtle left the next morning, she did promise to write to me. Zack Monroe and Miss Molly accompanied her home. When she left, I felt the ground moving underfoot. I wanted to move on. Most of the time I thought of her instead of my job. 2. A saddle tramp when the wanderlust struck again. Mr. Half sold a string of mother cows to Bittler in Shotwell, Eureka, Kansas, and they were to be delivered by the 1st of May in 1908. I was to be in charge. If I had not made that trip, I might have found the courage to ask Myrtle to be my wife. It only served to kindle the fire that was burning in my bosom to seek new range. She had written to me asking her to visit her in Wingate, Texas. I wanted to see her, and I wrote that I would. The son of Mr. Shotwell accompanied me on the trip. He had been raised in the city and showed me a new way of life. He was well acquainted with the vices of the city. Our stop over at Fort Worth in Wichita, Kansas, gave him a chance to give me my formal initiation to the ways of the world and women. I was gone 8 days on the trip, which shouldn't have taken more than 5. I learned more about the meanness that sin perpetrates than I had learned in all my 20-plus years. When I did return to Midland, I found things changed. Mr. Half had made these changes, and some I didn't like. Bill Irvin had been on a big drunk and had taken a shot at Mr. Half, plowing a furrow through his black hair with a .45 bullet. I had been discharged, of course. Another man had been hired to take his place, and Steen had gone to Dakota. It was about 4 in the morning when I got to Midland. I slept about 2 hours, and then I went to see Mr. Half. I called the ranch first and was told he was in a hotel in town. He was as cross as an old bear and told me to hurry up and get to the ranch. I left the room with a discontented heart. When I entered the lobby, a large, heavy-set man came up to me and asked if I worked for Mr. Half. I told him I had been, but was probably not for long. He told me that he was Mr. Pence, a manager for Morris and Company, and he was looking for men to carry cattle to the Dakotas. The Morris Company had bought out to the old L7 Cattle Company and was restocking with cattle and men. It was now the C7. He offered me a handsome monthly salary and expenses paid for the trip. That sounded good to me. Mr. Pence said that he would have a cattle loaded that day for me to be in Odessa ready to take charge of the train load. I hurried back up the stairs to Mr. Half's room and told him the sudden change of plans. His wife told me he was asleep and that she wouldn't wake him. I told her what I wanted and left. When Mr. Half woke, he sent for me to come to see him. He asked me to stay on, but I was determined. He asked me to go out to the ranch and get some business straightened out before leaving the country. I started out to the ranch, which was about 16 miles from Midland. 6 miles from the ranch, I came upon an old mare grazing along the side of the road. I told the boy who had come with me to stop when I got the mare. We hadn't gone much further when I found a cowhand we called Fred, sound asleep beside the road and dead drunk. He had been to town and had gotten so stewed that he had fallen off his horse. It was about half a mile from the schoolhouse. I looked around and seeing no one in sight, I gave in to the devil-may-care urge and killed the old mare and took out her entrails, and placed old Fred in their place, leaving only the head sticking out beneath the tail. I wound a rope around him so he wouldn't get out, and there I left old Fred for the coyotes to nibble on. At 12 noon the next day, he came to the ranch, and a more dilapidated sight I've yet to see. He looked like the lowest remnant of humanity as he stood before us all covered in dried blood. His hair was matted and his eyes were swollen. He said when he woke up he found himself cramped inside an old mare he had been riding. Only his head had been left sticking out, and the coyotes were eating the mare when he came to his senses. About daylight he was bothered by wild hogs. A bunch of them came around and began to eat. He was scared to death of the coyotes, but he knew the hogs would eat him alive. They paid no heed to his frantic yells. He managed to keep them away by his constant shouting of "Suey, pig, suey!" And when the children came by him on their way to school, he could not see them, and they could not see him. But they heard him suing calls, and they ran home and told their parents what they had seen of the old dead mayor and the hogs eating on her, and that she was saying for them to sue. They were afraid to pass the mayor, and their dad had to go with them to inspect. He was the one who found old Fred in this pitiful state. He was starved for water and almost dead for being cramped inside the old mayor. Fred was a native of old Ireland, and he had not forgotten the Irish language. He was telling us about how he felt while he lay there confined in the old mayor's belly. He said that he promised his Jesus that if he would deliver him from that old mayor's belly like he did Jonah from the whale, he would swear off of drinking. Years later, Fred's wife told me that he still wasn't drinking. He never suspected me as a prankster. He promised to shake the mischievous lad to death if he ever caught him. He could have beat me good. We laughed hard about old Fred, but the boys told me that never even got with me before I left the ranch, and it was a good one. Will Medland and Zach Monroe went for town and got onto a dummy of a show widow and dressed the thing up to look like Molly Hilger. They charged the phone wire so that it would enter the house just in front and over the room door, which opened onto the porch. There was no one at the ranch when I arrived late that Tuesday evening, but when I found the note from Mrs. Medland and the night supper was waiting for me, she told me in the note that the boys had gone to Garden City and would not be home until late. After my meal, I cleared away the dishes, and then I went to my room to read a paper. Everything was still as death, and not a breeze stirred to turn the noisy windmill that stood close to the yard. The big sycamores were lifeless and at ease. I had some time to think about the people I'd be leaving behind by going off to Dakota. I was suddenly aware I was being watched from the outside. Suddenly, I heard my name. Byrd! Byrd! I recognized Molly's voice calling me. I jumped to my feet and in 2 leaps was on the front porch. I saw her standing on the ledge. I spoke to her, but no answer came. I called her name and told her that everyone had gone to town. No answer. She stood motionless, looking at me. I strained my eyes in the darkness for a better look. I was sure it was Molly. It was her dress and bonnet. I had seen it many times. I could not imagine, though, how she had gotten to the ranch at that time of night. I stepped from the porch and started to take her arm. I called her name. I asked her why she had called out to me. She backed off the porch and went over the fence and disappeared into the night. I went back into my room, quite bewildered. Her actions had given me an eerie feeling, so I shut the door behind me. It was a nice night, and before I had left the door open, I still had the paper in my hand, so I sat down and tried again to read. I could not keep my eyes on the black words. I felt rather stupid, yet I knew Molly had stood before me. I had heard her call my name. Then it happened again. Byrd! Byrd! It was the same voice. Molly was sobbing this time. My hair began to stand on end, so I sat for a moment and listened. It came a little louder and deeper and more desperate. I got up and jerked the door and stepped on the porch, ready for battle. Now you look here, Molly Hilger, I shouted. What in the Sam Hill is wrong with you? I demanded, moving closer to her. I am damn tired of this foolishness. If nothing is wrong, by darn I'll make you talk. Why don't you answer me? She didn't answer. I was mad. I said, I will make you talk. With a mighty bound, I sprang at the dummy and caught it in both my arms, just as it started to move away from me. A peal of laughter from a dozen people burst out upon the still night. Molly came crawling out from under the porch where she had been all the time, and I felt like crawling into a hole. I was so ashamed of my cursing in front of the ladies, and everybody was laughing so hard at me, my apologies fell on deaf ears. I've never seen a group of cowboys laugh so hard, and at my expense. I had it coming. The cowboy's laugh was far from glamorous. It wasn't dull either, not in my life especially. Sam Preston and his wife gave a big dancing following Tuesday night, and that was to be my last night in Texas for some time. I wanted to go so I could tell all the old cowboys goodbye. I had just one more stunt to pull. I got a big old jack-o'-lantern that I had for some time, trimmed it up in good shape, and went to where Lewis Brown and his wife lived. They had not been married long. Mrs. Brown and I took an immediate dislike for each other. She had a sharp tongue and was constantly cutting at the men. They had a big goat that belonged to Rose Halloff, and they tried to keep it out of the yard. I took my lantern and tied it up on the billy goat's horns and led him inside the yard and waited for some time. I held my breath as Mrs. Brown came out the back door. I kept old Billy as still as a mouse, and with the face of Jack turned on her, and from behind the rose bushes until I caught everything just as I wanted. I let go of Billy and gave him a hard kick in the ribs, and he bounded forth right in front of her, made for the gate fast. She screamed and yelled, and I went to the lot and took the lantern off Billy's head and then rode on to the dance. I met Mr. Pence in Odessa, and he gave me the address of Charlie Hardy, Morristown, South Dakota, superintendent of the vast C7 spread. I had charge of 2,300 head of 2-year-old steers headed for a strange place. Little did I dream of what the future held for this old-time cowboy. As I sat in the caboose of that stock train, I thought the country I was leaving behind me. The train moved on through the night. Heavy clouds hovered near and lightning flashed. I felt small and lonely. I looked through the caboose window and thought of a small boy of 12 who had left home to help supplement the family income and had never found his way back. Hot tears stung my tanned eyes. I had been routed through Fort Worth, Kansas City, Sioux City, Iowa, Aberdeen, and Elbridge, South Dakota. After leaving Kansas, all the roads were new to me. Sioux City was the third feeding place in the way for a train of cattle.